Before we start, I have just a couple of thank yous. First of all, thank you to all of you for joining us here this morning. I know your time is precious and we appreciate you choosing to spend it with us. I'd like to give a special shout out to the legislators who are here today. In the House, I know we have Representative Paul Anderson. You can wave if you're around. Senator Mark Johnson, Senator Greg Clausen, and Senator Sandy Pappas. This is especially noteworthy because I understand conversations at the Capitol were continuing past midnight last night. I got a couple of regrets in the wee morning hours from others who had been planning to be here but instead are sleeping. Similarly, I'd like to thank our esteemed panelists for accepting our invitation. You'll hear more about them in a minute. I'd like to thank the Minnesota History Center and its staff for so graciously hosting us today in this beautiful facility. MinnPost is a reader-supported nonprofit, and we could not do what we do without the support of our more than 3,000 members, who together provide about half of our operating support. I see many members here today, and I thank you for your continued support. And finally, I'd like to thank AARP Minnesota for sponsoring this event. Without its support, this conversation would never have been possible. With that, I'd like to introduce AARP Minnesota State Director, Will Phillips.
Good morning, and thanks, Andy, for that, and of course, thanks to MinnPost for putting this discussion together for this morning, and thank you all for being here. As many of you know, AARP is a nonprofit, nonpartisan membership organization with nearly 660,000 members here in Minnesota, and our vision is to create a society in which all people live with dignity and purpose and fulfill their goals and dreams. So I think it should come as no surprise to anyone that we're here and interested in supporting and encouraging a discussion like the one that we'll be having here this morning. The expectations and ideas about retirement have changed for so many of us, and a variety of factors have contributed to growing challenges that workers face here in Minnesota and across the country, and how they're able to build economic security for themselves and their families. And some of the numbers you'll hear today are startling. Numbers like near 40% of Minnesota workers who do not have access to a retirement savings plan at work, or the typical near-retirement household with just $12,000 in savings, and so on. And so we absolutely should spend some time understanding the challenges that confront our people and our state as a whole. But I think important to us is that we've got to begin moving forward with solutions. And that's why today's discussion is so important. How can we help Minnesota workers save for a secure financial future, and what is your role? Those are the questions I'm looking forward to digging into today, and to help us dig into those and others is our moderator for today's discussion, MinnPost Managing Editor, Susan Albright. Please help me welcome Susan to the stage. Thank you.
Hello. As the first wave of baby boomers are beginning to retire, there's every reason to be concerned about both them and the succeeding generations that'll follow them. Will gave you a few stats. I will give you a couple more. The average Social Security benefit in Minnesota is about $1,400 a month, and many people think that that's what they will live on. Defined benefit pensions have been replaced by defined contribution systems like 401ks, which shift risks and choices to employees. Many of the employees who have access to such plans are confused about their options, don't think they can afford to put money aside, or for whatever reason don't fully participate in the program or realize the gains they could if they were better informed about the need to save and about investing itself. Of the 873,000 approximately Minnesotans who don't have access to any kind of retirement plan, many are of color, are women, are part-time workers, and many of them are confused about and overwhelmed by the array of financial services available to them. These are just a few stats that have employers, employees, and members of various states working to try to get creative solutions. The range of potential actions is very wide, everything from educating employers and educating employees, all the way to new state-administered plans that a number of states are exploring for employers who haven't created plans of their own. Such plans are both the subject of a new Minnesota Management and Budget Report released March 24th and of legislation introduced this week in the legislature. Today we'll explore from several perspectives the savings challenge and what we can do to address it. Our panelists, three of whom will join me on stage shortly, are Angela Antonelli, the Executive Director of the Center for Retirement Initiatives at Georgetown University, Emily Johnson Piper, the Commissioner of Minnesota's Department of Human Services, Teresa Rasmussen, President of Thrivent Financial, and Doug Loon, President of the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce. We will begin with Angela's overview of the Savings Challenge and how various states are experimenting with meeting that challenge. Unfortunately, yesterday, storms in Washington caused the cancellation of Angela's flight. So she and her PowerPoint will join us via video. She will start by giving us an overview of this whole situation. And then our panelists will offer their perspectives from their sectors on how to meet the challenge. So I present to you Angela from Georgetown.
Thank you, Susan. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be with you. And, again, I'm so sorry I couldn't be there because of the bad weather here in Washington, D.C., and that was passing through the country the past couple of days. But thank you to MinnPost. Thank you to AARP Minnesota, for hosting this event today. And I'm just glad that technology allowed me to still be able to be part of this conversation. So as Susan said, she asked me to sort of set the context about the Retirement Savings Challenge and what's being done to address the challenges, and more specifically, what's being done by the states and why. So why are states acting today? Minnesota, as Susan said, there is a report that recently has been issued that talks about the retirement savings challenges and options to be considered in Minnesota. Legislation that has been drafted. There will be hearings and discussions, no doubt, around all of that. And Minnesota is, like many other states, as I will show you very, very soon, taking these kinds of actions to start to address the retirement savings crisis. And why are they doing that? They're doing it because it is a major financial concern for American families today. And it has been that way for more than a decade. Gallup polling has shown that the fear of outliving savings is significant. People are not saving enough for retirement, and they have serious concerns that as they age, the money that they do have will not last through their lifetime. And the reality is Social Security is just simply not going to be enough to cover those expenses in retirement. I mean, the numbers are already very stark and disturbing with respect to the amount of our population that is dependent very heavily on Social Security. Today, almost half of unmarried retirees rely for Social Security for 90% of their income. And more than a quarter of married couples that are retired rely on Social Security for more than 90% of their income. And so this is something, as 10,000 Americans are turning 65 every day. Today, between now and 2030, we have to pay attention to these concerns and the lack of retirement readiness. And one of the contributing factors to why our citizens are not really well prepared and retirement ready is because more than half of the private sector workforce lacks access to a way to save through an employer-sponsored plan. And we know that having access to an employer-sponsored plan is one of the best ways for workers to save for their retirement. And what are the consequences? Policymakers are acting in the states because they see the lack of retirement readiness, and they understand that there are long-term budget and economic consequences to not taking action. what are the long-term budget consequences? They can be enormous because, as I mentioned, we already see the heavy dependence on Social Security for 90% or more of retirees' income. But they tend not to rely just on Social Security. They're also going to rely on other social safety net programs. They will rely on Medicare and Medicaid. They will rely on need for housing subsidies, energy assistance, food stamps. So the impact on social safety net programs and budgetary impact has the potential, it is already significant as we see at the debates at the state as well as national level. And that only has the potential to get more challenging and more difficult to deal with as we go forward. And then there are economic consequences of that, certainly as entitlement spending has to continue to increase, and what are the tax implications of that. On the other side, if we're able to help more workers save for retirement and they have more income in retirement, guess what? They're able to spend and contribute to the economy, and there are significant economic benefits to doing that. And so we have a lot of incentives on the side with policymakers today, understanding the nature of the problem. And one of the biggest reasons why states are taking action is factoring in the lack of retirement readiness, understanding the long-term budget and economic consequences, but also the reality that we have simply made no progress in 40 years to close the private sector access gap. You look at this chart and it has been fairly steady, give or take a few percentage points, that half of our private sector workers do not have access. 55 million American workers today do not have a way to save through an employer-sponsored plan. And so we are at a point now where I believe the state initiatives that we see happening and the focus on retirement security, we are at a point where we could really make a significant impact to change a trend that we have been unable to. Both Washington and the private sector has been unable to address for 40 years. And again, some very interesting things now that we see happening in the states that have the potential to change this. Again, as defined benefit plans have declined, and probably less than 20% of the population has access to defined benefit plans, and the rise of defined contribution savings as the primary vehicle. But again, workers, even if they do have access to defined contribution plans, are not necessarily either saving or saving enough for a variety of reasons. But again, that is compounded. The problem is compounded by virtue of the fact that, again, more than 55 million American workers, more than half the private sector workforce doesn't even have an easy way to save. So why should Minnesota act? Again, the report that was just issued helps understand this in more concrete, real terms. Again, 40% of the private sector workers in Minnesota are not covered by an employer plan. Small businesses lack plans. 95, and this is what we see in Minnesota is indicative of the rest of the country. America is largely a small business nation. More than 99% of all small businesses, 99% of all businesses in the U.S. are small businesses. In Minnesota, 95% of the state businesses are under 100, and 60% of them don't provide an employer-sponsored plan. And if they're really small, 10 or fewer employees, then 78% of them don't. We have a rapidly aging population. As I said, I call it a silver tsunami, where 10,000 Americans are turning 65 every day. Actually, Minnesota's population is going to be aging even more rapidly than we see nationally, with an 84% growth in those numbers, 65 and over, by 2030. So 1 in 5 of your population is going to be over age 65 in the next 15 years. And again, little saved for retirement. The report that was issued shows in Minnesota about average $38,000 in a defined contribution account. If you turn that in, you annuitize that, it's maybe about $250 a month in additional income to supplement Social Security, which isn't very much. Nationally, the average monthly benefit is about $1,341. And again, the significant budget savings and economic benefits of taking action. The study that was done by CEVO Consulting, state by state, shows that in first 10 years of having these state facilitated plans set up, the potential savings in Minnesota could be 124 million in Medicaid savings alone. And actually in Minnesota, that savings, I'm not real familiar with what's happening in Minnesota with your Medicaid program, but that cost savings actually is in the top 10 of the states for the potential savings in Medicaid if you had a state facilitated plan. Again, if we can help retirees save, even helping them save a little bit and helping young people today start to save a little bit. Again, if they're able to start in their 20s and save for 40 years, sometimes opponents will minimize the value of saving $25 or $50. You cannot underestimate the value of saving $25 or $50. Any little bit of amount that workers can begin to set aside, and the earlier they can do that, the better it is. And at the end of the day, they will have more money in their retirement. And again, there are great economic benefits to do that. For every 100 retirees new to a community who are able to spend money and contribute to that community economically, you have 55 new jobs that could be created. So given the lack of retirement readiness, given that for 4 decades we've not been able to close the lack of access gap among private sector workers, states jump in. States are problem solvers. They have to be. They're closer to the people. People expect that issues are going to be addressed at the state and local level. You really do the heavy lifting. Minnesota was one of the first states to highlight the challenges with respect to retirement readiness in 2014 in launching that study that you now have. And it really helped propel other states. Again, I'll show you just how much we've accomplished in just a few years. So states are stepping up. Their goal is to design simple, effective, low-cost, easy, accessible, and effective savings options for private sector workers. There's strong bipartisan support for this, contrary to what you might hear. 75% of Americans polled support state-facilitated plans. In polling that's been done for the past few years by the National Institute of Retirement Security, among polled self-identified Republicans, 73% support state-facilitated plans, and more than 80% of those who identified as Democrats support state-facilitated plans. This has been a bipartisan idea and initiative that's been advanced for several years now. And again, because of state leadership, we are really on the edge of being able to finally make some significant breakthroughs, as long as Washington doesn't get in the way, and I'll talk about that a little bit. And there's strong small business support. And I want to emphasize what my experience has been working with, and I work with more than 25 states on a regular basis, that when you actually talk to small businesses in the states, as opposed to having it filtered through national organizations that supposedly represent small businesses are very encouraging and supportive of state facilitated plans. They understand that it's good to help recruit and retain employees. And quite honestly, in some cases, the existence of a state facilitated plan sort of as a nudge is just going to help overall encourage greater retirement plan adoption by more employers. So there are great benefits to these actions. This is the map. Since 2012, 40 states have considered or enacted private sector retirement initiatives. This is phenomenal progress in a very short time. The private sector has said and has readily admitted that for low and moderate income workers, for the very small businesses, it has not been profitable to serve these populations. Hence why, for 4 decades now, we've not seen a lot of progress made to close this access gap. What states have essentially said is, look, we understand what we may be facing in terms of budget and economic consequences from an aging, poor population. We're reaching out to you in the form of public-private partnerships, private sector, and we want to partner with you. And working with you, we will bring you into the fold, and through setting up a state-facilitated program, work with you, because these programs will be administered by outside third parties, namely the financial industry and others, to help bring together low and moderate income workers and get these small businesses in, and in fact, make it easier for the private sector to serve these populations. So I've always found it a little bit baffling why the private sector, some corners have been challenging these state initiatives. Again, there's lots of opportunities that through these public-private partnerships, the private sector will have to have it be more worth their while to be able to serve populations that, again, they've readily admitted they are not interested and it's not been profitable for them to serve. So when you look at this map, you see the red. The red are the 8 states that have programs that are in place and being implemented. In addition, we've seen yellow and green signifying the green states actually show in 2017, even with new Congress, new administration, some issues that I'll mention very briefly that have come up that have been introducing legislative proposals, whether they be program bills or study bills. But again, overall, just since 2012, and really between 2014 and 2017, we've seen all but 10 states start to focus on the issue of retirement security. It's phenomenal progress, and hopefully Washington will not interfere with that. 8 states and 3 models adopted to date, as I mentioned. So when you look at this, these are all of the options that states have to choose from. And we continue, and the beauty of the state level action is the ability to experiment and to innovate. So what you see here is very quickly the 5 states, California, Illinois, Oregon, Maryland, and Connecticut, that have the mandatory auto-enroll IRA programs. And then we have Washington and New Jersey with marketplaces. You see that on the right side, on the lower, number 3. And then you have Massachusetts on the right side, and number 2 with a prototype plan, which is targeted for nonprofits. Again, most of these options are all voluntary. You have on the left side the ERISA exempt, which are largely the payroll deduction IRA approach. Number 2 is the auto enroll. DOL, the U.S. Department of Labor, between 2015 and 2016, basically issued rules and guidance that sort of set this framework for these options of what's ERISA exempt, which are the options you see on the left side related to IRAs, and on the ERISA-based plans on the right side of your screen, which are the multiple employer type plans. They allow for state open MEPs, and I point out they allow for state facilitated open MEPs. One of the challenges and controversies is that they didn't open the MEPs for the private sector. That's something that Washington is considering doing as well. They've been considering it legislatively for a few years, and they will likely, probably the likelihood of seeing that happen this year is probably the best it's been. And then you have master prototype plans and the marketplace options. But let me point out to you the bottom, the combination of multi-tiered options. So given these 6 options that you see on the top part of the slide, what we've seen states, again, be innovative is thinking about how we can combine these different options that we have. Could we have a voluntary open MEP? If it's an ERISA plan, it must be voluntary for employers. So understanding that, let's try a voluntary state facilitated open MEP and see how that is. In the event that perhaps there isn't the uptake that you would expect, then we'll also make available an auto IRA program, whether it be a plain payroll deduction IRA or it could be a mandatory auto IRA. So again, combining these different options is the direction that now, with lessons learned and progress that's been made, states are considering combining and thinking in new ways about how to address this problem and construct these program designs. Some of the lessons I just want to share with you really quickly in Minnesota as you think about designing legislation and a program. In many of the states, they had to take the time to understand their states, their population, what the small businesses look like, the industries. We talk about the contingent and gig workforce, a lot of independent contractors. What will you do with that? Engaging and bringing a lot of stakeholders to the table early and often. Treasurers who are often tasked to implement these programs spend a lot of time going around their states and having discussions with stakeholders and small businesses. And in doing that, it helps refine the overall policy goals and objectives so that you make the right program design decision and what works best for your states. And ultimately, what we've now seen after a few years of experience is states drafting bills, they're not nearly as specific with respect to locking in program design details, because what they've learned is they will learn and they need to be flexible and to adjust. And so as setting up oversight boards, delegating to those boards the responsibilities to figure out a lot of the design details, default contribution rates, what the product is that's going to be offered, and so on, and employers that can participate. And in states that are getting ready to launch, they're doing it through pilot tests and more phased-in approaches. So taking a very methodical approach to ensure success. And at the end of the day, obviously, with state programs and public programs generally, transparency and accountability are must. And so taking the time to make sure that the process is always an open process, because at the end of the day, the public will hold you accountable for your programs and the results of those programs and the dollars that are spent. So what to watch in 2017? We have a new Congress and administration. So 2 months now has felt like 2 years sitting here in Washington. There's a lot that's still to be determined and discussed. We will have to see what a new administration and Congress does with respect to the DOL rules that, again, when I showed you the options that are available. It's possible that the Congress may rescind the safe harbor that allows for mandatory auto-enroll IRAs to be exempt from ERISA. However, if that does happen, that does not stop state programs. It may create some uncertainty and just simply takes it back to where we were in 2015, where states were asking DOL, hi, we've passed these laws, we want to move forward with these programs. We'd really appreciate if you tell us whether or not they're subject to ERISA. That's exactly what DOL did. To the extent they rescind the rules, there's just some uncertainty around that. And ultimately, the programs can move forward. And more than likely, the ERISA applicability to those plans will be determined probably through litigation. Tax reform, the retirement savings system is all underpinned through tax law and the tax code. And so what will happen there will have a significant impact on retirement savings. And we need to watch that with respect to IRAs, 401ks, employer-sponsored plans. Big is that Washington and Oregon are going to be the first states to launch in 2017, again with pilot programs in the second half of this year, and then hopefully full launch in 2018. One of the great things with the state nudge and seeing all of this state activity is that, quite honestly, I think the private sector has realized they had to up their game in response to what they see happening. And quite honestly, the fact that the status quo is just not working. Something has to change. Somebody has to do something. States are doing that, but the private sector is getting the push. And so the role of technology, especially with millennials, having savings on, apps on phones, really easy, simple use of technology that makes it easy to make those decisions to start to save. Investment education efforts, I don't know if you all see it, but I certainly see it, whether it's Prudential, Fidelity, Vanguard, pick your company. I think they are now starting, as people look at their retirement savings through their employers, you see much more of a discussion and question about what are your end goals? Do you feel like you're prepared for retirement? Rather than what it's been just savings for savings sake and no real talk about lifetime income, more discussion around that and education around that and what you need to do as an individual to adequately prepare. And auto portability issues as another example. We have a problem where workers sometimes, more today, have many different jobs. And so they're moving around a lot. Sometimes accounts get lost. So how can we use technology to help accounts stay attached to individuals as they move for employers? So there's innovation that's going on. I'm not sure if Washington and the states stop focusing on putting pressure with respect to retirement readiness, that this innovation will continue to occur. We'd like to think it would, but again, I think there's great benefits to these public-private partnerships, and I think we're beginning to see that. And then we need to tackle some really challenging public policy issues overall that we haven't done. In addition to closing the gap, the big issue is lifetime income. Again, it's not just savings for savings sake, but people want to be able to save, and we want to help them be able to save so it's income that lasts them for a lifetime. And so how do we help them understand that? Because a lot of workers today, when they get ready to retire, go to their employers, they take out the money as a lump sum, and they're not always the best at managing that to last a lifetime. So and annuitization, looking at annuities, Connecticut is the one state program that has as part of its program taking part of the savings and actually dedicating those funds to an annuity as part of their program. So again, lots of exciting things that have happened, a little bit of uncertainty with the new administration and Congress and how they will play with respect to retirement savings and security. But again, I remain very optimistic. The states will continue to move forward. We'll just have to get some of these policy questions if they become a little bit unclear again and get that clarity and allow us to continue to move forward. And I'll leave you with, this is federalism, the way federalism is supposed to work. Senator Bob Corker on the floor of the Senate recently talking about the DOL regs, which again, Congress is contemplating rescinding. Senator Corker is a Republican who believes that the states should have the freedom to basically look at all of these options, not have any of them restricted, and look at what works best. And I believe that over time, it's a little bit messy and we have lots of different things going on right now with the states, but over time, with state experimentation and innovation, we will learn and we will get better at understanding what works. And again, I think we have the opportunity to change what has been unchanged for more than 4 decades with respect to retirement savings and security. So with that, I will stop. That is our website, cri.georgetown.edu. We recently did a report for the state of Vermont as for their study group. You can find all information on what's happening in the states legislatively and program implementation activities by going to our website, as well as links to all various groups that work on retirement security issues. Again, thank you very much for the opportunity. I look forward to the discussion and answering your questions.
Thank you very much, Angela, for the overview, and I'd like to now invite our panelists to come up to the stage, and we'll get some more perspectives. I think first I'd like to have Emily Piper, our Commissioner of Human Services, give a little picture of what it means if a lot of people aren't prepared, and what it means for Minnesota in particular.
Well, in Minnesota, as Angela said, we're aging at a greater rate than...
Andy, can you hear me?
We're aging at a greater rate than other states are, and not only does savings or not savings have impacts on families and the people who are aging, but it also has really significant impacts on our state budget. And we know in Minnesota, about 70% of people, seniors in our state, will at some point access public assistance in one form or another, and the biggest piece of that is Medicaid, and in Minnesota that's medical assistance. And we project that based on what we see now, that long-term care for medical assistance payments is going to triple in the next 25 years, from $1.1 billion in 2015 to $3.8 billion by 2040. So when we talk about the growth in our public health care programs and the growth in that taking a piece of the state's budget, that's only going to continue, and it's really exponentially going to continue as long as we maintain the status quo of people not saving enough for retirement and having then to rely on public assistance in our state.
Thank you. And Teresa, could you give us a picture of the financial services industry and how you think it's best to address this challenge?
Certainly, and it's a privilege to be here today. You know, I have been in the financial services industry for close to 30 years, and at least during that time, we have talked about the retirement crisis, and that people were not saving enough for retirement. But what surprised me was about 2 weeks ago, the Wall Street Journal published a report, and the most financially secure and happiest Americans happened to be retirees. So we must have been doing something right, and maybe we should thank AARP for, you know, the work that they've done, because our retirees really are happy. So one of the things we probably should do is stop and ask them. At Thrivent, we think, or at least our hypothesis is that retirees, they adjust their lifestyle to the income that they have. And so from our perspective, it's not only looking at the income side and the saving side, but also the expense side as well. So I'm going to start with really on the generational side, because I think planning early in your career, as Angela said, is critical. And so with millennials, and I have 2 of them, and despite the fact I've spent most of my career in financial services, they're the first to say they're financially illiterate. And so I would say, you know, making sure that we have great education programs for them. The millennials know, and the surveys support, that they are not counting on Social Security. They know that they have to save for retirement. They just don't know what to do. And so, you know, if they're, and my daughter fortunately is lucky enough to be employed, and so when she signed up for her benefits, she called her mother and she said, "Mom, what do I do? It's this auto pay or auto enroll." And I said, "That's a good thing." And it's, you know, this escalation, and we figured out, you know, how much she should save in her 401k plan. Now, going back again 30 years ago when I started my career, and my parents gave me the advice that, you know, you should always pay yourself first. And so out of my paycheck, I had my 401k, I had my emergency savings, and I learned to live on what was left. And so I think getting back to basic planning for our millennials to make sure that they have the education and they're saving not only for retirement, but for those emergencies that will inevitably come. And so it's really kind of getting more at, you know, that expense side. Now, today's millennials have a tremendous amount of student debt, and so there's a practical problem here too. And I think our message is always, it's nice to look at macro data, but you have to get personal and practical here. And so, you know, really looking at individual situations and helping them create a plan, and so that they can start on, you know, really the path of a secure financial future. So in the millennials case, you know, they consume information on the internet, and so I think we have a whole host of opportunity there to really create some education programs and help them get on this healthy path. The other thing, while we know the retirees are the most happy and the most financially secure in retirement, it's those pre-retirees. And so let's talk about the millennials' parents, the baby boomers who haven't retired yet, and the Gen Xers. They're scared, and I think because they don't know how much they need in retirement, and we've been talking about accumulation, but we've never been talking about, you know, what do you need to do in retirement, or how much is enough in retirement? And so we have to start having that conversation. But as families, there was just a report issued, I think this week, talking about how families, multi-generational families, don't talk about their financial affairs, whether it's elderly parents and where's anything in their house, or it's bestowing values to your kids on you know, how you should save. And what is your relationship with money? So I do think encouraging families to start to have those conversations. Hopefully, you know, I do think the Gen Xers and the baby boomers who haven't retired, who are worried, you know, let's equip your kids, and so they're not worried when they reach your age, and that they're fully prepared. The other thing I would say is that with the pre-retireds who are scared, talking about a crisis just makes them scareder. And so you have to give hope. And doing little things and getting them on the path is better than doing nothing. And so if you set out a goal that's totally impossible to achieve, it's very demotivating. And it really doesn't motivate. I mean, it's just kind of like, well, I guess the state's just going to have to take care of me. And so I think some of the things that we would say is getting personal and practical is you shouldn't have a mortgage when you're retired. Your home and your health are the two big expenses you're going to have in retirement. And so you should not have a mortgage because that's a big expense. Then let's talk about your health. As Emily Commissioner Piper said, you know, basically it's the Medicare and Medicaid that's going to be the big issue, and that's with long-term care. And if there is a crisis, it's really around long-term care, making sure that people have the ability to access health care. And so if there's anything that the public and private sector should be working on, it's focusing on long-term care. The thing I would leave with is that there are a whole host of tactics, I think, from you know, an education program on, you know, making sure that retirees are, you know, mortgage-free, you know, at 65. There are a whole host of programs on, you know, helping people, you know, manage the expense side, because, you know, people, you know, you only have a limited amount of income on the revenue side, and so if you're going to free up dollars to save, you've got to address the expense side. So let's actually have these campaigns, and let's also reach out to these small employers and help them with education. Many of them, just like our millennials, are overwhelmed by the choices, and they need help. They need someone that can sort through all of the options that they have. I'll leave you with this funny story. I was in Chicago earlier this week, and it was an executive summit of, we're a fraternal benefit society, so it was the fraternal benefit societies, and one of my colleagues just turned 65. He'd been in financial services his entire career, and he said, Terry, he goes, oh my gosh, I had no idea all the options. I need help. I need someone to help me pick which plan I should have. And I said, yeah, and we're in this industry. We should know. And so it is complex. You do need an advisor. You need someone that can help you make choices and help you get on a good path of financial security.
Thank you, Teresa. And now Doug Loon will talk a little bit from the employer perspective and from the small business perspective. What should we do, Doug?
Thank you, Susan. First, let me say thank you to MinnPost and the AARP for sponsoring today's program. This is a very important, weighty topic. Certainly, the business community has a role in this discussion, and we welcome it. At the Minnesota Chamber, we have 2,300 member businesses statewide, large and small, all corners of the state represented, all sectors of the business community represented. The bulk of our members are small businesses, and much of the discussion today is around the shared responsibility of the business community in securing economic security. Certainly that's in the interest of every business in the state. We at the Minnesota Chamber like to think about how do we help facilitate and drive economic opportunity generally for all Minnesotans to, if they want to, start a business, grow that business, become successful with it, and keep it right here in Minnesota. That's fundamentally what we try to do at the legislature with the agencies, both through private sector solutions and public sector solutions. So we see this also as an urgent matter, and I agree with Teresa. Is it really a crisis? And I agree, yes, there's a need for this, but Minnesota does pretty well. The data that Pew Research put out, Minnesota is second best among 50 states, with 69% of workers having access to retirement plans within their business. And that participation is actually pretty strong at 61%. Do we have room to grow? Is there headroom yet? Absolutely. The question is on the table is how do we do that? Do we do it with a public sector mandate? We would argue probably something we should seriously not do. Should we look at a system by which businesses, as the professor spoke, nudge businesses forward? Let's have a discussion about what nudging means. Because if you nudge too hard, sometimes businesses will find it harder to be in business, and that ultimately creates some challenges. I just spent quite a bit of time on the road recently, going out and visiting with business leaders across the state. We do this actually every year as we get ready for the session, but this year we decided to do it mid-session. And one of the greatest challenge that comes up when we ask businesses around the state, what is the challenge for your business to be successful in Minnesota today? And you know, you think about it, oh, I bet you're saying, you know, the taxation system or regulations, those are all important for businesses. They'd like to see those addressed and for government to run efficiently. But the number one thing is finding their workforce. Both availability of workers and skill sets surrounding those workers. And that's the number one challenge facing businesses today. So as we think about regulations that drive the economy forward, that allow the private sector to be successful, let's be thoughtful about how we enable businesses to attract workers, to retain those workers, to train those workers, and for those workers to be successful within their employment. And creating opportunities within their benefits portfolio is a good thing. Businesses need the flexibility, though, to craft those portfolios of benefits that meets the unique needs of that business and the needs of their employees. So there needs to be a conversation between employers and employees about their benefit packages, and we believe that occurs. Small businesses are particularly challenged in this space because their margins are much narrower. When they have a responsibility providing benefits, there's a cost to their business, and the complexity surrounding that is always a burden on those businesses. So you add that to the competitive marketplace that they're in, not just statewide, but nationally and globally. That's a challenge for small businesses. And layering on new mandates on that, we caution against greatly from the Minnesota Chamber perspective. Now, Teresa mentioned also this thing that we call economic literacy, financial literacy. We all have a responsibility to not only educate ourselves, but the next generation and the next generation, helping them understand what it takes to balance a checkbook, show up for work, right? Be successful, but also know how to manage your finances. I think we've done a disservice. I think that's a generational thing here in Minnesota and around the country. But it's also something I think educators have a responsibility in as well. And I think the legislature has done some work in this area and probably could do more work to help really build the fundamentals of understanding what a personal responsibility is, and in partnership with your employer so that you can be economically successful and manage your personal affairs so that you know that you need a retirement savings. That in many cases your employer is offering you a vehicle, take advantage of it. It's surprising to me that when they are offered it many times, sometimes they don't take them up on it, right? So even if they do offer it, they sometimes opt out. So why is that? And I think that goes back to economic literacy and making sure that individuals understand what their opportunities are in front of them and make it easy for them to understand. There is complexity to being a responsible citizen dealing with your own finances. I was lucky. I grew up in a family that did help us, encourage us to save. I was also lucky. I had basically 3 fundamental employers in my career, and all 3 offered a plan. So I was lucky. That's not always the case, but you can take personal responsibility and understand your economic situation and build yourself towards retirement if you understand the fundamentals of that. And I think we need to do a better job of that, both within our families and within our education institutions and with your employer. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Good. I'd like to explore a little bit about these sort of behavioral nudges. Angela has written about this. Angela, are you still with us?
Yes.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the kinds of nudges that can be built into systems that both help the employer and the employee in the case of trying to have actions that work, even if people don't have economic literacy.
Well, again, there's the area of behavioral economic research has really sort of taken off in the past few years, and there are a number of great scholars working in this area of research. Bridget Madrian at Harvard. We have Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein, who've written books about the benefits of providing tools and nudges to help folks basically act in their best interests. I think, economic theory suggests that people always have perfect information and will always take actions in their best interests, and in this case, in their financial best interests. And we know that that's not the case. I mean, human nature sort of factors into it and doesn't always lead to those perfect outcomes. And so the concept of these tools and nudges, in the case of retirement savings plans, what we talk about, again, in talking about having the benefits of a plan offered to workers through their place of employment is because we know that their workers are 15 times more likely to save if they have access to an employer-sponsored plan. So simply having that easy access is an example. But in the design of the plans itself, auto-enrollment. If you have auto-enrollment as part of a plan, so Vanguard did a study where they looked at auto-enrollment and its effect on participation in a plan. And it essentially doubled participation in the plan from somewhere around 42% to 91% participation. Auto-escalation, which is also a feature that's available in 401k plans as an example. where, there might be a 1% increase sort of built in year after year. Again, that's another way. Once people are automatically enrolled, 80% of the population that participates will stay in. They will not opt out. So we know that these kinds of tools work. Financial education, Bridget Madrian has talked about this a lot. I think when people look at how people save, one of the interesting things on retirement savings is a lot of people will say the employer match is the most important thing that will get people to save. And there's no question that an employer match obviously is beneficial. It adds to the amount that employees can save. But actually, there are very, very simple things that employers can do, and that quite honestly, their plan providers are not often doing, but hopefully I think we see them doing it more, which is instead of just, hi, new worker, welcome to our company, here's the benefits package, and plop it in front of them and say, okay, we hope you're going to sign up or do something. And oftentimes that contributes to inertia and they don't do it because a lot of options are offered. Then they have to make a lot of choices. I mean, I look at my retirement plans that I've seen where you have, 40, 50, 60 different investment options. Simplifying the investment options that are offered is an example of helping make it easier to make those kinds of choices for the employees. But also, instead of just giving them the package and saying, we hope you're going to do something, setting deadlines, making it clear to them, little email reminders, notifications. Hi, I've given you the package. You've got 60 days to make a decision. And once you've made that decision, you're not going to get to change it for another 6 months or a year. And so setting up clear targets and deadlines for action helps to significantly increase the likelihood that workers are going to begin to take advantage of a plan that's being offered by their employer. And then again, keeping those choices simplified so they're not overwhelmed. So again, there are lots of options. And again, on the financial education, where again, I think the private sector is stepping up and beginning to do more to provide information to their employees and saying, you're saving for retirement, but what's your goal? What do you want to be able to do in retirement? And enter in your assets, your liabilities, and start having a real dialogue about what you want to see and envision when you retire. And again, that can be very helpful. So there are lots of different tools and nudges that are actually quite simple beyond the notion of an employer match that we already know can have significant impact. Little steps, huge impact.
Thank you. Before we open it up to questions, I'm wondering if any of you would like to make certain points in response to your colleagues.
I'd like to. When I want to answer the crisis question from my perspective. And when I think about Medicaid, it's about $11 billion a year in Minnesota. That's how big the program is. And seniors and people with disabilities make up about 19% in any given year of the population served on Medicaid. But they're already between 58 and 59% of the cost of the program. And so, one of the challenges we have, and one of the big drivers of that, is the increased costs in long-term care, and we're going to see a growth in our population as we age at a greater rate than other states. And so, one of the problems with that and with what's happening in Washington is that the changes that the federal government is making to Medicaid result in, the one that was being considered by the House resulted in the first 18 months a $2 billion cut to our Medicaid program and in federal funding. And so when we look at how states are going to have to deal with this, it's more immediate, I think, for state budgets and for people, many, a million people on Medicaid every year, and it's going to come home faster than I think, if there are the changes at the federal level, it's going to come home faster than we think, compounding the problems that we're up here talking about. And so one of the ways that Minnesota has tried to be innovative as a state and address the problem is to do things to try and keep people in their own homes, keep them private pay insurance as long as possible by providing them additional services, trying to keep people out of nursing homes for as long as possible, and trying to develop state plans to incent retirement savings going forward. But at the end of the day, if something fundamentally doesn't change on that graph that we saw earlier, not only are there going to be problems outside of healthcare, but there's going to be really significant problems in continuing to fund the services for people with disabilities and our elderly in our state going forward, particularly given what's happening in Washington and what the conversations are. Medicaid pays over 50% of nursing home costs in the state of Minnesota right now. And that's only going to grow if we don't do something fundamentally different to help families and aging people in the state of Minnesota solve some of these really significant retirement issues. And so we're trying to do what we can. We're trying to develop additional long-term care, private pay solutions for folks. We have this study that was commissioned by the legislature in 2014. But ultimately, there's going to need to be some really systemic shifts, and it's going to be everything from more flexible workplace environments for people who are taking care of aging parents, to making it easier in financial literacy and having families have these conversations to try and solve for themselves some of these really challenging financial issues that they're going to be facing.
Okay. So I'd like to comment, with Angela, and I think there are some very, very simple things that we can do to get us on the right path. I did say both of my kids were financially literate. One is, and one is actually fairly literate. And I'll point to a program and a difference. And I don't know if it's that different or difference that made a difference in this particular case. But at the University of South Carolina, where my son went, every freshman is required to take a personal finance class. And, between his freshman and sophomore year, when he came home, he was working for the summer, and guess what he asked for at Christmas? A Roth IRA. So he got a Roth IRA.
I think.
Yeah, he got a Roth IRA. And so, I think that's an example of, education and educating our kids does make a difference. And so, I think there are so many things we can do to make sure that they get on the path of financial literacy and security.
Did you have another?
Sure, I'll put a finer point on, I think, the shared objective, and that is to have more employers offering plans in retirement vehicles with the specific target of the small businesses that the data showed earlier were particularly slow in offering these plans. Many times, as you know, small businesses start up, last for a while, some are very successful, make it for a long time, others shut their doors and become something else. So there's natural churn in the small business marketplace, so that's obviously a barrier too. But I think some of the ideas that have been in this area, and Angela talked about these a little bit earlier, that there are some innovative things that can be done to help small businesses, specifically the multiple employer plans, MEPs as she referred to them, I think are really a unique opportunity to allow small businesses to come together and create a purchasing pool, leveraging their capital more efficiently, limiting their exposure. Creates a path. And if you're a small business person, you don't have a CFO necessarily. You have an accountant that is part of a firm probably. You're not going to have kind of the inside knowledge that you need. You need to rely on a third party, and being able for you to leverage a group to be in a purchasing pool together, I think is a very innovative approach. I think I would encourage policymakers to look at that here in Minnesota to see if there's some things that could be done to make that easier. But it would be a voluntary, it wouldn't be an auto-enroll, and it wouldn't be a mandate. But it can also be very important to small businesses to allow that targeted group to be more successful in this space.
Thank you. Well, with that, I think we'd like to open this up to questions. We have two people here who will go up and down and bring microphones to you. So let's have some questions.
Hi, my name is Steve Anderson. I'm a retired actuary. And one of my most interesting assignments was when the ALC and the LCA merged. They hired almost every consulting firm in the Twin Cities because one organization was contributing 9% to their pastors and the other was doing 12%. And they wanted to know, well, what's the right number? And I think everybody came up with the number somewhere between 9 and 12. We always thought that was kind of high. And one of the reasons it was high was that individual pastors are probably not going to make the best investment decisions. And so we did a little analysis. We thought, if people were investing more in equities, than bonds, they could probably get that number down to 6 or 7%. So my question is, you know, this seems like a very complicated problem. On the other hand, if we could just get everybody to put 6 or 7% into an equity index fund, in the next 30 or 40 years, this problem would go away. That's a fairly simple answer, but why isn't anybody trying to educate people to implement that?
Someone want to take that on?
It's in your space. Called out the Lutherans,
Well,
I think.
he did, yeah. You know, I would say, I mean, it is that simple when you know it's presented that way, and so I think again it's back to having families having that conversation, and so it's instilling in your children this notion that, you know, pay yourself first. And you know, here's the percentage that you know, if asked, this is what I would do. You know, it gets back to, you know, just again having this plan and having the conversation.
I have a little bit different question, and that's the reality of the economics that many people in our country, and in Minnesota particularly, are facing. They just plain do not have economic resources to invest in retirement. We have a group of people who are maxed out with mortgages that owe a lot of money. They're debt-ridden. We have millennials who are debt-ridden to start with just by graduating from college, if they make it that far, because they can't really afford it, and more finances for that are going away. We also have a lot of people who are working 2 to 3 jobs, many of them which have, quote, no benefits, and they're just trying to survive on a day-to-day basis. So when they're faced with the question of whether I should put $10 or $20 into savings, or I should use that $10 or $20 to buy food for my kids to eat, they make the decision to buy the food for their kids to eat. There are many families in this state who are doubling up. You've got 2 or 3 families living in one household in order to pay the rent. So the reality is that I have not heard any of you address that on how do we, when there's a large percentage of our population that doesn't have any savings for retirement at all. They don't have 12,000, they don't have 0. So that's what they have, is 0, nothing. So my question to you is, how do we as a state address that group of people? Because they're the ones who are going to put all the costs for Medicare and everything else up because they have no means to retire. And they're making low wages, so they're going to draw a minimum amount of Social Security. So, I mean, this is the challenge. You know, the people, I'm not worried at the people at the top 1% or, because they're going to have plenty of money. They don't even need Social Security. But the majority of people that I know need Social Security to live on. And, you know, the challenge at the federal level is they want to take away that. They want to take away Medicare. There are many seniors that I know who now, today, are retired, but they're working part-time at least, and many full-time in order to make ends meet. This is the economic reality we're in. When we talk about the challenge of saving for retirement, we need to do a lot more if we're going to achieve that goal. I'd like to have anybody's response.
Yeah.
So I will start, and then hopefully my colleagues here will join in as well. So I couldn't agree more. I think consumerism and consumption have been issues, and that's really focusing on the expense side. So first, if you are a lower income person, Social Security will provide about 50% of your income in retirement. Now, most pundits will say you need 80 to 85% of your income in retirement, and so in that particular case, people are going to have to work part-time. That's their reality. And so, you know, to me, I think we should think about tax policy. You know, at that level, Social Security is not taxed, but when you have to work part-time, you know, I think we need to actually look at that and say, is there something we can do so that the dollars that you get go further? You know, the other thing I would say, and this is where we've done some studies at Thrivent as well, and so if you are 55 years old and you have a house and you have a large mortgage, the thing you probably should do is sell your house and reduce your lifestyle at that point in time, and so that you've got 10 years to then take what you were paying, in a mortgage and the difference that you have to pay in a lower mortgage to save for retirement. And so the other thing I think people have to consider is your retirement age. And, is it feasible for people to retire at 65? Is it feasible for people, do they have to work longer? And I think those are some of the hard messages that we have. Because you're right, you can't actually increase, you can't have a larger income. Your income is what your income is, and so those are some of the things you have to do to address it. But it's not easy.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is, a challenging issue, and it's very, there are broader economic issues at play here that need to be addressed. I mean, ultimately, we want to have a strong, growing economy that's creating good jobs, and good jobs with, good pay and good benefits. I mean, that will obviously help a lot of workers. And so there are, economic policy decisions that are going to be made as we move forward here that's going to either help achieve that or not. And we continue to have the scenario that the questioner raised about what we see with the gig economy, contingent workforce, which has really expanded over the past few years, people working 2 or 3 jobs and really not having access to any kind of benefits, and certainly not the ability to easily save for retirement. So again, larger economic policy issues at play. We need to start focusing on young people. We do have the challenges that we face now with middle-aged workers. Focusing on education efforts, again, as was discussed by Teresa, I think can make a significant difference here if we can focus on our young people and get them to be thinking about these things and making better financial decisions, because we know those education programs can help reduce, when we look at millennials, their level of credit card debt, the decisions they made about whether or not they're going to buy a mortgage and take on that debt. I have to say, from Washington and my experience, we're really good at setting up federal programs that facilitate the acquisition of debt. We're terrible at programs, and we're fighting horribly about doing things that will actually help people to save. And that's a frustration on my part. I'd like us to change from a debt culture to a savings culture, and I hope these discussions around retirement security have spillover to a broader discussion about facilitating savings. But for those who are facing retirement, near retirement age now, and they don't have a lot saved, yes, a lot of them think, I'm not going to be able to retire anytime soon. But that's unfortunate. And the reality is to say just work longer is really not a very good answer as far as I'm concerned, because of the reality of the workforce and ageism. Most people, you think, I just want to work till 70. Well, good luck, because a lot of people after the age of 50 have a hard time and often are disrupted in their careers and their ability to work. So I don't think just working longer is an answer. We need good jobs. We need jobs that provide benefits. We need education to get millennials saving earlier. And this retirement savings discussion plugs into and must plug into a much broader discussion about economic policy. How do we grow jobs? Again, those high-paying jobs with good benefits. And that ultimately is what will allow more workers to save. I will make one note on folks who are low income, and they do have these financial challenges. And studies, they can't even meet a $400 emergency savings that might come up. We want to be able to work with them because, situations do vary. And again, I understand it's a challenge, but you just never know. And if we're able to put in front of them a way to save, and it's a way to save for retirement, and one of the other things we're contemplating is, given these types of questions and concerns, which are very real, maybe there's a way that we can have an add-on type of savings arrangement that also helps facilitate saving for emergencies. So yeah, I mean, they may not have the ability to save anything, even for emergencies, but for some, we will, by expanding the access, in fact, be able to help them. We won't be able to help everybody. And we do need to do more to help educate them and to make sure that younger people are not going to face the levels of debt that we see a lot of families struggling with now, and certainly not entering into that debt, as I've seen with a lot of families that I've worked with that are near retirement age and carrying huge amounts of mortgage and other debt, and they just still hadn't thought about, even in their 50s, what their life would be like when they're 70 or 80.
So I hear this from families all across the state because DHS serves over 1 million people every year, and many of the programs that we administer are for low-income Minnesotans from early childhood up through retirement. And you're right, people can't. The people that I hear from and that my agency serves on a daily basis don't feel like they have an extra $50 a month to put in a retirement account. But for me, it's really important, regardless of that challenge, that we're trying to do everything we can, knowing that over a third of Minnesotans don't have any plan for long-term care for the future. In survey after survey that we conduct, we're trying to do what we can on the social services side to not only control cost, but also to help support people so that regardless of, or in addition to any savings that they have, they're supported and they can live as independently as possible. And so in Minnesota, nursing homes cost about $180 a day on public health care to support people. And so we've made, under Governor Dayton's leadership, investments in programs for people who maybe don't have a lot of savings but don't quite yet qualify for Medicaid but wind up in the nursing home. We develop programs to provide supportive services for folks to get them out of nursing home care, back into their homes for as long as possible, because we know that people want to age in place regardless of their income level, and they also want to make sure that we're not excessively spending money that we don't have to in really expensive nursing care. And so we're trying to do some of that work to solve for this gap in long-term care, because to your point about, why doesn't everybody just, or wouldn't we solve a lot of problems if we should just put, 6% or 8% in? Well, if we don't have viable private long-term care solutions across the state, which we're really at risk of right now for regular Minnesotans, we can put all we can in that retirement savings, and people are still gonna have a gap because long-term care is so expensive. And we're still gonna pay for that as a state going forward, because we are the ones, Medicaid is the one that picks up that gap for people all across the state. And so we have this this campaign that we've been working on with Governor Dayton called Own Your Future, where we are trying to work to develop new solutions to the gap that we see on the private long-term care insurance market. So trying to have conversations about and do some actuarial analysis about what products need to be developed for the next, the next generation of long-term care to solve this gap where there aren't really affordable solutions for folks on the private market side to buy long-term care insurance if you're a middle-income person. And what does that need to look like going forward so that Medicaid doesn't continue to have to bear the vast majority of the brunt of the expense for people in Minnesota?
I have a question for possibly Antonelli. I was deeply affected by what Mr. Loon had to say about the fact that we need we need workers in this state, and deeply affected by the person behind us who commented about the fact that so many people have no money at all for retirement. My question for Antonelli is it possible that something really creative could come out of Minnesota? That's what we pride ourselves in. Could something really creative come out of Minnesota? Say a super Social Security that's for Minnesotans only. Yeah, laugh, but it's the thing that some people are guaranteeing. So I guess I'd ask you the question, what kind of a really super plan could be devised that would help keep people want to come to this state for work, as well as to help the people who don't have the retirement?
Well, again, I think, for small businesses, the issue of whether or not they're able to provide benefits for their workers and can afford to do that, including a way to save for retirement, is a challenge. And that's why we're having these discussions about state facilitated, savings plans. Again, it takes the cost off of small businesses and is really, keep costs extremely low and will allow more workers to be able to save who work in these small businesses in Minnesota. So again, what can the state do? I hope you will continue on the path that you are currently on. And again, the commissioner has spoken about the challenges that the elderly are facing in Minnesota and what the cost implications are to the state. We have to address this issue now. We have to address it with young people. We have to make it easier and low cost for small businesses to be able to do this and offer this to their workers. What can they do? Again, I leave it to Minnesota. There are lots of options that can be considered and evaluated in your state, and to talk among the citizens and the businesses in your state and really see what will work best. Doug mentioned the multiple employer plan. That's something that, again, there's a lot of interest on the part of states on that, to look at that as an option, as well as an auto IRA type approach. So at this point, Minnesota can really lead by continuing on the path that it's been on and looking at these options. I hope that you will find, and leadership will find in the state, that as they engage their citizens and workers, you will find the support there to do that. You will find it to be bipartisan and to craft something that's bipartisan and that can be successful in your state, and to move forward with that so we can learn, and hopefully people in Minnesota will be better off. And again, it will be something that will be a beacon for the rest of the country to look to. But again, lots of options, and I think it's really up to the state to engage with its citizens and small businesses to determine what has the potential to really work best. And again, workers will benefit and business will benefit from having these additional benefits available to workers.
Let me respond to that as well. I agree. Minnesota is a very innovative state, both publicly and privately. It's part of our heritage. It's in our DNA, and fundamentally, and I'll go back to the question that came up earlier. Success in the area of economic success starts with access to a good job. And many times that's an entry-level job at a young age, and you move up the income ladder and you gain skills and you get retraining when necessary and you move up the income ladder. But we got to make sure that we create that opportunity at all levels of the income ladder. And as I said earlier, Minnesota's businesses are facing a serious challenge on finding workers that meet their needs today and their needs in the future. And our educational institutions need to meet that challenge, but we also got to make sure that that access thing to those jobs is critical. There's a lot of side components to the workforce challenge. Many times it's about not just skills or learning those skills, but it's also about soft skills. It's also about, which is about showing up for work on time, showing up prepared to work. But it's also about, can you get to that job? We have pockets of high unemployment in the state. We need a mobility solution that allows people to get to those jobs, whether you're in northern Minnesota with a job maybe over in Alex, or if you're in North Minneapolis with a job in the southern suburbs. We got to make sure that people can get to where the jobs are. It's easier for that employee to move around than it is for the jobs to pick up and move. That's because they're bricks and mortar many times. So part of the challenge is access through mobility, and there's also the affordability question of living in Minnesota. We need to make this place affordable. We got to keep it competitive from an affordability standpoint. If housing's going up, why is it going up, right? If the cost of goods and services are going up, why are they going up? And that goes back to the fundamentals of our economy. Can we make Minnesota an affordable place to live, an attractive place to live, so we can create access to good jobs, and the skill set challenge that creates people to move up that income ladder is part of the solution to your question. And we've been innovating in that space for a long time, and that can be part of the solution.
I think we have a question over here.
Thank you. My name is Barbara Joy Klein, and I happen to be a thriving financial representative and have a master's degree in social work and was Leesburg County Human Services Director at one point, and was the department head in Hennepin County when Peter McLaughlin and I went to the legislature and added the Social Rehab Benefits Act. So I'm so thankful for this panel. This is a discussion that needs to happen. And I want to thank MinnPost, Andy Steiner, for the work that she does in the mental health area in educating people on issues. That's so, so important. So a couple things I wanted to point out. When I came back, so I lived in California for 12 years, came back a year and a half ago. My husband had health issues, be close to family. When I saw Minnesota's long-term care partnership plan, I couldn't believe it. I had to go and meet with your staff to believe it was that good. Compared to California's, it is that good. It's so much more flexible, affordable, fabulous. The other thing I learned coming back is from looking for elder care attorneys, found out about the spousal impoverishment issue. I have the DHS bulletin. I have met with Ann Henry, who wants to meet with Thrive and educate financial advisors on the spousal impoverishment issue. It's huge, and almost no one understands it. And when I was Leesburg County Human Services Director, and we had way too many nursing home beds in Minnesota, there were women living there because they only had Social Security and couldn't afford to be anywhere else. Don't want to go back there again either. So, and then I wanted to add tax breaks. People don't simply know about tax breaks. Gee, they don't even know what their tax rate is. Gee, if I put more into retirement, I can pay less in taxes? Huge. So there's strategies here that people don't know because your average person doesn't think they need a financial advisor. And I hate the term wealth advisor because that really limits people from thinking about how they can get advice. College financial planning, we have a terrific class in college financial strategies, which college to go to. Don't have your money in this bucket, have your money in your retirement bucket. I have had fabulous fun doing that work in California. Adult protection. I'm seeing it, everyone's seeing it. That system needs to be ratcheted up the way the child welfare system is ratcheted up. Had a client that in one of our counties that got a typed letter back, we're not gonna come and see you about this, when the caregiver was ripping off the person in the nursing home. That huge, needs to be escalated up as soon as possible. So my last suggestion is, I think it's education. It's also, I work with clients who, my grandfather did this and that's why I won't do that. I think there needs to be so many levels of financial education across the board, and including government workers who think, oh, I'm a government worker, I don't need any financial advice. A lot of the people I work with have spent their retirement on their autistic child, on their memory care spouse. And you have a grant to Belle Plaine. I'm on the memory care. They're making a memory community down there. They're educating the community on memory. The numbers of people coming up with memory issues, Alzheimer's, is huge. The amount of need for day programming, huge. I work in New Prague. Half the county is Scott County, half the county is Leesburg County. They point to the state points to the health plans. Who's going to bring in day programs for people who need to pay out of pocket for that, and then they need to understand the tax break. And look at the tax breaks thing. I don't know why you have to get up to 10% to get a tax break for out-of-pocket health care expenses these days. Most people aren't able to do that, and that would help them to put more money in retirement if they didn't have to, if they got more tax breaks for out-of-pocket medical care.
Thank you. I think Emily's going to respond a bit, and then I think we're out of time.
Well, I was just going to comment. I appreciate your comments about adult protection, and there is, one of the challenges we have in human services is that there's clearly a growing need, and so we brought legislation to enhance adult protective services and are trying to work with counties all across the state to streamline how we respond and how we take in complaints. But in last year alone, we had a 40% increase in adult protection investigation complaints that were made. So we're really concerned about it. I would say education is really important, and it's something that we should all have at the front of our mind, and it's clear that we have a lot of work to do, but access at the end of the day is just a key barrier. And I hear from folks, the other day DHS is meeting with a group of moms on MFIP, which is our Minnesota Family Investment Program. And it's probably what you would consider what the most sort of traditional welfare program that we have in our state that we provide. And those moms were asking about, could we do something creative to help us take a piece of our MFIP funding and put it into a retirement account? Because we know we need to start saving. And these are moms, young moms with little kids who are poor, that don't have access to the tools that they need to effectively save. And so we need our systems, all of them, from what's driving our workforce challenges, what's driving people's access to workforce. Well, a big part of it for the population that I serve is access to affordable childcare. And it's not only where they live, but it's also the tools that they need to get to jobs and the barriers that they face. And until we solve that problem for the young families or the older families that need flexible work solutions from employers to take care of that aging parent or to do the work that they need to do to help support their loved one with a disability, the access component is going to be a really significant barrier for people. And so we have been really innovative in Minnesota. I agree with Doug. And we need to continue to think about what are all of the tools in the toolbox that we need to solve these issues today and in 30 years for the people who are young now, but we know are going to be aging going forward, and how do we continue to lead the nation in the work that we do? And I think we're well poised to do so in a bipartisan way, particularly with older adult services that are being provided and developed across the state, but like every other state, we have a long way to go.
Well, I'm going to let Emily have the last word with that. And I want to thank this panel. This has been a very interesting discussion and a very important one. We're just starting this discussion in a broad way in Minnesota, and I hope you'll all keep talking. Thank you so much for coming.